Nuclear. Trick or treat? September 2015. Japan has one nuclear power plant in operation. Prior to the earthquake and tsunami of March 2011 and the nuclear disaster of Fukushima, Japan's nuclear plants were closed one by one, or their operations suspended for safety inspections. The last of Japan's 50 reactors, Tamari 3, went offline for maintenance on May 5, 2012, leaving Japan completely without nuclear-produced electrical power for the first time since 1970. On August 11, 2015, the Sendai nuclear power plant was brought back online. As of September 2015, it is the only nuclear power plant operating in Japan, yet. Fukushima is one of the 3 major nuclear accidents. The other 2 were 3 Mile Island in the United States of America in 1979 and Chernobyl in Ukraine, then officially the Ukrainian SSR, in 1986. The Chernobyl disaster was the worst nuclear power plant accident in history in terms of cost and casualties. It is one of only 2 classified as a Level 7 event, the maximum classification on the International Nuclear Event Scale, the other being the Fukushima disaster. But what about nuclear energy? How does it work? A nuclear reactor produces electricity in much the same way other power plants do. Some form of energy creates heat, which turns water into steam. The pressure of the steam turns a generator, which produces electricity. The difference is in how the heat is created. Power plants that run on fossil fuels burn coal, oil, or natural gas to generate heat. In a nuclear energy facility, heat is produced from splitting atoms, a process called nuclear fission. Enriched uranium is the fuel for nuclear reactors. It is an abundant, naturally radioactive element found in most rocks. As uranium breaks down or decays, it produces heat inside the Earth's crust. A similar process generates heat inside a nuclear reactor. And that's basically it. Now let's look at both sides in the discussion. So, what's nuclear power's biggest advantage? Minor CO2. That's right, it doesn't depend on fossil fuels, so CO2 emissions are minimal. According to the Nuclear Energy Institute, the power produced by the world's nuclear plants would normally produce 2 billion metric tons of CO2 per year if they depended on fossil fuels. In fact, a properly functioning nuclear power plant actually releases less radioactivity into the atmosphere than a coal-fired power. More efficiency. Plus, all this comes with a far lighter fuel requirement. Nuclear fission produces roughly 1 million times more energy per unit weight than fossil fuel alternatives. And then there are the negatives. Radiation risk. Historically, mining and purifying uranium hasn't been a very clean process. Even transporting nuclear fuel to and from plants poses a contamination risk, and once the fuel is spent, you can't just throw it in the city dump. It's still radioactive and potentially deadly. Nuclear waste. On average, a nuclear power plant annually generates 20 metric tons of used nuclear fuel, classified as high-level radioactive waste. When you take into account every nuclear plant on Earth, the combined total climbs to roughly 2,000 metric tons a year. All of this waste emits radiation and heat, meaning that it will eventually corrode any container that holds it. It can also prove lethal to nearby life forms. As if this weren't bad enough, nuclear power plants produce a great deal of low-level radioactive waste, in the form of radiated parts and equipment. High costs. This waste has to be maintained, monitored, and guarded to prevent the materials from falling into the wrong hands. All of these services and added materials cost money, on top of the high costs required to build the plant in the first place. High known risks in an accident, which brings us back to Fukushima. September 2015, Japan has one nuclear power plant in operation and plans to reactivate the others. On August 11, 2015, the Sendai nuclear power plant was brought back online. As of September 2015, it is the only nuclear power plant operating in Japan. Yet, besides many protests, each one of them is going to be evaluated and possibly turned on, one by one. What will the future bring is yet to be known.